And just to recap, this is the second series of events organised by the Inverse Care Law Study Group at Cardiff University. We had an event in November in the Glamorgan building where we were discussing research that had been done with the Division of Population Medicine at Cardiff University, talking about inequalities in funding to general practice services. To briefly recap, the data appeared to be indicating that practices near deprivation were getting significantly less funding from core funding sources through GMS. Dr. Jones' approach is highlighting some further issues with the Carr Hill formula. So we wanted to continue the conversation in understanding how do we shift towards having a more needs-based, equitable, fair community primary care system that will tackle the population health challenges and inequalities that we know we face from year to year in Wales. So the way we're going to run this is the webinar is booked out for about 45 minutes. I appreciate we started a little bit late, so we might roll over for 5-10 minutes if we can, but I know everybody may be joining on the lunch break. There will be time for questions to Matt afterwards. I'm going to hand over in a second. And if you would like to be involved, included in future events, just drop us an email, get in touch, follow us on our website and social media, and we look forward to continuing this conversation leading up to the Senate elections in 2026. So without further ado, I'm going to come off mic and hand over to Matt to walk us through his research. Thanks, Matt.
Right, hello everyone. My name is Matt Jones. I'm a GP partner over in St Isan Road, and I've been looking into the Carr Hill formula for the last few years and really very interested in funding differences across Wales. And Johnny's right, when he released his recent paper in the Open BMJ, I literally tracked him down and rugby tackled him after an introduction and said, Johnny, I need to talk to you. I've been doing all this research, and I think in a weird way, North Cardiff can link in a little bit with the deep end and some of his research with health inequalities, because I think the Carr Hill formula needs really decent exploration because it's so complicated, and it's really taken me a huge amount of time and a lot of freedom of information requests to work out what exactly is going on. So I'm going to try and share a quick presentation if that's okay. So if I do that, sorry, that's Andrew. If I bring that out, let's go back to the beginning. Right, Johnny, can I just have a quick thumbs up to say if that's working, or just a quick say, yeah, can you see that?
That's working, Matt. Yep, go ahead.
Fantastic. And it's quite a lot of information to go through. So if it's okay, the questions at the end, I'm sure there's be quite a lot. I've done this kind of presentation a few times, and it doesn't really work if everyone asks questions at the same time. So it's not being rude, it's just please write them in the chat and we'll try and address as many of them as possible. So this is really a review of the Carr Hill formula in Wales from some of the things that I've been looking at. And my objective today is demonstrate how all GP practices in Wales have been underfunded in comparison to England since 2004 due to the normalisation at the national level. I'm going to question the validity of using the same funding formula in England as in Wales. I'm going to show that the Carr Hill formula has progressively been distorted over time. And I'm going to show some of my research into revealing the current impact of the Carr Hill formula on GP practice finances today. And I'm going to discuss my opinions on the necessary actions now and in the future. Again, that's an opinion rather than any particular evidence there. So let's go back to the background of the Carr Hill formula. It was introduced in 2004 using data that was really collected a few years before that across England and Wales in an attempt to create a capitation system to fairly allocate resources between practices based on GP workload and the medical complexity of the patients. Now, that seems kind of a very noble aim, but let's see. It was split up into 6 different components: age and sex, patient distance, and spread away from the main GP practice. This is often called rurality, and it's slightly different to rurality because you can have one of the interesting things about this component is you can have 2 urban practices a long way away from each other, because you only have a main practice and the patients are registered in that site, and so they seemingly are a long way away. So I'm not totally convinced that's just rurality. Patient digital and needs index, nursing home population, list turnover, and market forces. Okay. I'm going to be talking about weighted list sizes, So if a 10,000 patient practice had a weighting of 0.8, that same practice would only get paid for 8,000 patients. And if a 10,000 practice had a weighting of 1.2, they would get paid as if they had 12,000 patients. Okay. This is not a critique of the formula. I've actually done a video. It was a presentation. I've chucked it up onto YouTube. If you are so interested, you can go and have a look. It's called the Carr Hill delusion. It really talks about going into detail about each of those points and working out, kind of almost critiquing them and saying what I think, what are the problems with them, what are the good things about them, and I've done that on that video. So the first thing, and really the main thing I wanted to talk about today is, well, why is Wales disadvantaged compared to England? Why are Welsh GP practices underfunded? And that's because of something called normalisation at national level. Now, maybe you were aware of this, certainly I wasn't, and it took me a long time to try and work this out. So this was, I was interested in this. I came across this paper almost by accident. It's called Primary Care Capitation Payments in the UK, an observational study. And it was done by these three authors, Guion, Rees, Claire Morgan, and Hendrik Biesticher. Now, Guion was a North Walian GP who died the year that this came out. So I have a feeling that this didn't go as far as it should have done because he kind of tragically died. So the theory behind this paper was when the Carr Hill was originally calculated, both English and Welsh data were amalgamated, and that's true. And the author claims that the initial indices of the Carr Hill formula for Wales were calculated about 1.1, 1.11 or 1.12. However, due to the normalisation at the national level, it was reset to 1. Now, when and how did it change? So if we look at what happened pre-2004, the GMS contracts were held between the GP practice and the central government. However, in 2004, when the Carr Hill formula was introduced, it was between that GP practice and the local health board. The Welsh Assembly government took over the contracts in 2006, so they were really handed this poison chalice. So now, because the normalisation within the same country had already occurred, and it goes on to say that the English practices benefited from Wales being removed from the Carr Hill formula by 0.6, and Welsh practices lost between 10.8 and 12.2%. Now, all of that is fine, but is there a simpler way to explain this? What have I just been rabbiting on for the last 2 minutes all about? What is normalisation at the national level? Why does that mean we're disadvantaged? Well, the example that I like to give is the North-East independence. Now, the North-East has the highest average Carr Hill of both England and Wales. This is around 1.12, and that's roughly the same as Wales, really. Now, imagine tomorrow the North-East declares it's independent and healthcare in the North-East is devolved. Well, if it's normalised within that area, the new Carr Hill from tomorrow is suddenly one. That extra funding for the additional medical complexity and morality just disappears, and GPs in the North-East would be massively disadvantaged by that. If we look at an example of this, this is roughly the Carr Hill formula averages around the whole of England and Wales. And so you can see there that the North-East is 1.12, the Wales is 1.12, Southwest is 1.04, and London is 0.93. And what happened in 2004 was this happened. So we go, yep, done. And in a stroke, all that extra funding has disappeared. So if you really want to, you can map every Carr Hill of every English practice, and it looks a bit like this, bell curve distribution. And the reason why I'm showing you that, so sorry, let's go back to this one. So England's got about 6,500 GP practices, Wales has got about 370 at the moment. If you map them all on a graph, it would look like this for all the Carr Hills of all the practices. Now, what I'm saying is that in 2004, the authors of that paper in 2011 predicted that this is what would happen. So this is the black line is the English GPs, the red line is the Welsh GPs. And what happened was that the English data was taken out, Welsh data was compared only by itself. And because of that, there was a ginormous shift. Now, we don't know exactly how that shifted. We don't know if it's kind of gone uniformly like that. We don't know if some of the lower practices have been pulled further. But what that means is that the whole of Wales, virtually every single practice will be disadvantaged by this to a certain degree. But why does shifting why does that mean that Wales is underfunded? Well, the Carr Hill formula in Wales is 1.000, like I just said, and the Carr Hill formula of England is 1.000. They are exactly the same. Now, this is confirmed by NHS Shared Services and NHS England. Now, that doesn't mean very much. So what? They're just the same. Well, Wales is not Little England. Wales is older. So if you think about the most important, the most powerful components of funding in primary care, the number one by a margin is the age of the patients you have. And now, if Wales is older on average, it is impossible that it has the same Carr Hill formula as England. It's much more rural, as in much more rural. So the second most important factor is rurality, distance away from the practice. And Wales is 4 times more sparse. So English patients are 4 times more densely populated than in Wales. Wales has a lower life expectancy, a higher proportion of patients over the age of 65. And the bottom two are really related to the practice additional needs index. So it has a higher standardized mortality ratio and a higher percentage of people living with a limiting long-standing illness or disability. Again, these are the last two of the components of the practice additional needs index. So for every single component of the Carr Hill formula, Wales are ahead. I'm not saying this proves that this is that Wales had originally had a Carr Hill formula of 1.11, but it cannot be the same, and it has to be higher than England. And the reason why this is important is because Welsh GPs were funded the same. So the Carr Hill formula, so the global sum allocation, the global sum allocation in 2004 was the same, and it's been virtually identical up until 22-23 when all the QAF was recycled into the global sum. So the formula was the same, the job you had to do was exactly the same, but the Carr Hill was different. So in the paper, it's quite interesting. They said that a Welsh GP would either have to work 11.2% harder or take home 11.2% less of a salary if you were a GP partner. And that's really, I didn't put those sums in today, but if you look at the data, if you look at every single year, the NHS will release data about how much GP partners get paid, and always English partners get paid £10,000–15,000 more than Welsh GPs. And I know that the contracts have diverged, but this is fundamental to why that's the case. I'm also going to quickly move on to the validity of using the same funding formula. So I've highlighted some of the differences between England and Wales, and it's really quite stark. One of the things, again, I talked about in a different presentation was how highly funded is your health board. Because I talk about Wales not being Little England. Now you can't, if you look at the different cities. So one of the things that the Carr Hill formula discriminates against in a way is younger people in urban areas. Now that's why Johnny's found this relationship between funding and deprivation, because in urban areas and the younger population in deprived areas, they're going to receive less of the funding according to the Carr Hill formula. Now Wales is not just Little England. If you look at there's different cities and towns in Wales, there's nothing really to offset Cardiff. So Cardiff, for example, is by far the biggest city and virtually has no other competitors with it, whereas London has got Birmingham, Leeds, Liverpool, Sheffield, Manchester, Bristol. All of those are spreading out the effect of the Carr Hill formula, whereas Cardiff is really, really being hammered home. So is the urban areas of Swansea, Newport as well, and Barry. So if you look at the global sum, if you look at every single health board, the Carr Hill average for that health board, and if you were to map it across this graph, Cardiff and Vale is an outlier. It is worse off in terms of the health board average than every other practice. Now, what's really important, and something that was pointed out to me, is this really a fair comparison? Because what you're doing is you're comparing health boards within England that are normalised within England and health boards within Wales that are normalised within Wales. Well, they're comparable. They are comparable, but they're just not equivalent. So I think it's important to compare them, but I'm not saying that's not the same. That Cardiff and Vale would not be 0.878 if it were in England. It would be much higher. It would be at least 0.12 higher. Yeah, there's the ranking of the Welsh health boards by Carr Hill average. And there's some extreme variation in Carr Hill. as I said, there's 6,500 GP practices in England, and there's 370 in Wales. If you were to add them all together and then look at the Carr Hill and then put them in an order, so rank them from the top to the bottom, again, this is really hard to explain, but there's 107 different primary care health organizations in England. So 42 ICBs split up into 107 different primary care organizations, and there's 7 health boards in Wales. So there's 114 different kind of health boards, if you like, or financial entities that call themselves related to health. Now, if you were looking at an even spread of practices throughout that, you would expect one practice in that to be in the bottom 114. What Wales have got is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They've got 9 in the bottom 50. And now that means that there's an extreme variation. What's happening in Wales is some of the practices are getting really, really hammered by this Carr Hill formula, because it should never have been used in isolation in Wales, because it's not valid. So when you're thinking about a formula designed for 57 million people across, that's what I'm talking about, 107 different primary care organizations, it's not really valid when applied to 3 million people across 7 health boards. Now, another thing that I keep talking about, the 6,500 GP practices in England, because you think about data points on a graph. Now, the whole point of the Carr Hill formula was you're looking to discriminate between different GP practices and different workloads. Now, in England, you've got 6,500 data points, and you can come up with a really smooth bell curve distribution. When you've only got 370 points on a graph, what you're ending up is you're really spreading it out, and you might not have the same validity as if you had 6,500. It just doesn't make sense. It certainly won't have the same kind of power. And one of the things I've always been really disappointed in is there's never been an official review into the validity of the Carr Hill formula in Wales. There's never been a review in the Carr Hill formula in Wales ever, as in ever since the creation of it. And it doesn't really make sense, especially when you had it implemented in 2004, and then in 2014, MPIG started to get phased out. So one of the things that I've been looking at is the 2004 Carr Hill formula, which was so bad that it needed MPIG within the first week, is the 2004 Carr Hill formula the same as the 2024 Carr Hill formula? And I'm not totally convinced it is. So when I often talk about it being overpowered, and one of the reasons why I think that is because if you look at the salary of the mid-range BMA salary of a full-time GP, is £58,000 a year in 2004, and it's £91,000 a year. So it's just over £10,000 a session in 2024, 23-24. Whereas if you look at the global sum allocation, it was £54 a patient in 2004, and now it's more than doubled. It's £126. So because the global sum allocation has more than doubled, but the mid-range of a full-time GP hasn't, it means that the allocation of funds is slightly off kilter. So if you think about 10,000 patient practice, I'm only doing that because that's roughly the average size of a practice now, and it's very easy for sums. If you think about what the 2004 Carr Hill formula could buy you, if the difference between a 0.8 and a 1.2 practice with no MPIG, let's pretend MPIG didn't exist, was about 3 GPs worth. If you look at what you can buy in 2024, it's really 5 GPs worth. And I'm not adding on costs, but I'm not adding on costs on either side. So there's been a distortion in the resources you're able to purchase, because the whole point of the Carr Hill formula is you get this extra money and you're meant to be using it specifically for appointments, and that means you're buying in staff. I found that a little bit complicated, so I've had to, again, I keep trying to refine this to make it slightly easier for people to understand. Is that in 2004, if you were to look at it from a chart point of view, if you go, okay, so how much for every 0.1 extra on my Carr Hill, how much does that mean extra the practice is going to get? So if you're using the 10,000 practice, but mainly because it's easy for sums, every time you go up 0.1, you get an extra 54,000. That makes sense. And that's 93% of a full-time GP. And if you go down the list, you go minus 93%. Whereas if you go down to 2024, you're looking at 139%. So these differences are much, much bigger. And as you go further down, it gets much, much, much larger. So one of the things that I would probably criticize the Carr Hill funding formula for is that it's really a funding formula. It shouldn't really be a resource allocation formula. And if the amount of resources had stayed constant for 20 years, there'd be a narrowing of the Carr Hill formula allocations. Now, this is something they could have built in right from the start as a safety mechanism. If the global sum allocation is far outstripping salaries, then it needs to kind of squash. And if you were to look at this and calculate what you could buy in 2004 and then compare it to what you could buy in 2024, it means that the Carr Hill formula would have squashed by a third towards 1. So the 0.7s would now be 0.8, and the 1.3s would be moving down to 1.2. I reveal the current impact of the Carr Hill formula. Now, this is something that I found out through a freedom of information request with NHS Shared Services. It's just really the Carr Hill formula for all the practices in Wales. And then what I did was I put it into a spreadsheet and I said, what's your, exactly the same as this, what's the net effect of that? Are you down by 100,000? Are you down by 200,000? Or are you positive 200,000 or 300,000? And I think that the funding differences are really distorting general practice, and I think they're very, very difficult to justify such big gaps. Now, if you use Pomprano, which is one of the lowest, it's a non-student practice. It's I'm using this with their permission. Their weighting is 0.7, and they're a decent sized practice of 11,500. They're £409,000 down because of the Carr Hill formula, and I think it's virtually impossible to suggest that they're giving proportionally less funding than any other practice in Wales, because there are practices that are very disappointed to be 100 or 200,000 pounds down. The Pomprano aren't disappointed; they're just on the verge of annihilation because of this. What do I think the actions? What do I think it would be reasonable to do now and in the future? This isn't going to be to everyone's taste. I understand that, but I don't think you can use the Carr Hill formula anymore. I think it's been overused. It's overpowered. I think future GMS uplift should be on the raw patient list size until a new funding formula is sought, and I think that would have to be very specific to Wales. I don't think there's any way we can just use what England are using and just copy and paste it across. I don't think it would fit our population. I don't think it would be quite right for us. The other, just to go into how would that actually work, you would keep the global sum allocation the same, and any extra funding would be just split into a different pot. There's a couple of counter arguments to this. Now, certainly I've heard this before, rearranging chairs on the Titanic. And I always thought, unless you saw the spreadsheets with all the funding on it, you wouldn't actually know what it looked like. So I think it's a better analogy is to make sure everyone's got access to the lifeboat. Counter arguments, the zero sum game. If you make any changes to any of the formula, you're going to end up with winners and losers. Well, kind of, but at the moment, you're anointed a loser because you can't do very much about your rurality. You can't do very much about the practice additional needs index because that's all totally fixed. You don't get any extra funding for what you code in the notes. The practice additional needs index is fixed from 1998, so it doesn't matter what your population is. It depends where they live and what the postcode is. Nothing can be changed until everything's changed. This is a quote from the GPC England when I wrote to them, and they expressed their frustration because it's the GPC England's #1 priority to change the Carr Hill formula, but they said at the moment no one is agreeing anything until everything is changed, which I think my idea of uplifting by raw practice list sizes is reasonable. The rising tide lifts all boats. I've heard this a lot of times, and I'm suggesting that is not the case if their Carr Hill formula is less than 1. There's an expectation that the Carr Hill formula will be continued to be followed. Well, there's an expectation, but I don't think it's correct, and I don't think you can continue to widen GP practice funding indefinitely. And so my conclusion before I finish is Welsh GPs are disadvantaged compared to English GPs, and I think that's very clear. I've got significant concerns over the validity of the Carr Hill formula for Welsh GP practices. I think the Carr Hill formula was fundamentally flawed in 2004. That's why MPIC was introduced, and I think that the situation is now significantly worse. I think rebalancing of finances needs to occur, and a new funding formula versus human oversight. I definitely think there should be a panel to have a look at the finances, because you need to be aware of things that change. So the whole point is, if there's significant evidence to say that deprived areas need additional funding, there needs to be a human oversight to that. And they need to go, yeah, they need to be reactive to that and not wait 20 years before people start complaining about it. They need to say, okay, well, there's a lot of evidence here to say deprived areas need extra funding. Let's put it in. Or we think, oh, there's some evidence now to say that the gap is now too big between the highest and lowest funded practices. Maybe that needs to be squashed a little bit. The fact that it's just, you set off this capitation formula and just let it run, I think is really a big mistake. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. I'll wait and hear your comments.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, everybody, for waiting so patiently whilst we change the meeting settings to allow you all to come off mute. Thank you, Matt. You've obviously done a huge amount of work behind this. It's obviously been a huge source of passion for you. I'll invite people to ask questions. If you want, you can, I think, put your hands up, because we haven't had much in the way of questions or comments so far in the chat. Brian, do you want to go first?
Hello, Matt. I was health minister when the Carr Hill formula actually came in Wales. Just on the politics of it, one of the first things that the Assembly did when it came into being was to look at the health allocation formula, because the area with the highest level of funding per capita, I'm working from memory now, I haven't got the figure for, was Dyfed-Powys. And Dyfed-Powys was the healthiest health board or health authority in Wales. So at that particular stage, the healthiest health authority was having the most funding, which seemed very strange. So we did look at revising the formula, and the formula did change in the early 2000s. We brought in Peter Townsend from Bristol to look at the overall health formula in Wales, and he came up with his own health index based on the level of identified morbidity by area. So that's just the context. But when the Carr Hill formula came in, that was a negotiation between the Welsh government, as it was, and GPC Wales. So the shape of the Carr Hill in Wales was the consequence of GP representatives in Wales negotiating with the Welsh government. And, you know, so it would be interesting. I mean, I don't suppose there's any paperwork, but why GPC Wales negotiated on the particular lines that it chose to negotiate at that particular juncture. The main question I want to ask, however, is that this analysis doesn't seem to refer to the Barnett formula at all. And as I understand it, all health money in Wales comes via the Barnett formula. And once the Barnett formula turns out a certain figure in England, then that's what we've got in Wales. But of course, the Jerry Holtham review, which took place in the late 2000s, showed that the Barnett formula systemically underprovides for Wales, because it's a historical formula. It's not a needs-based formula. And on that basis, Wales would actually be funded akin to the northeast of England if it was a needs-based formula. So because we're living with a Barnett formula, which decides most of the money that we get in Wales, then I think that really needs to be factored into the analysis. I'll stop at that for the minute because I'm sure, I could go on a bit more. But congratulations, incidentally, on what you've done. It's been absolutely fascinating. And, I think that you probably, anyone that's interested in this could sit down for 2 or 3 hours and chew the fat about the details of this. But I would be interested in your comments in relation to how GPC Wales decided how money should be distributed to practices, the effect of the Barnett formula, and the implications of the whole term review, which showed the systemic underfunding of Wales because of the fact that it's not needs-based.
So I presented this, a very similar presentation to the LMC, and on that LMC was Ian Harris, the Deputy Chair of the GPC Wales. And he said the GPC Wales have been aware of this in 2000. They were aware of this in 2006 when the Welsh Assembly government took over health in Wales, and they said that they understood that there was a problem with the formula, but they couldn't. It wasn't a good. He was saying it wasn't the fault. It wasn't the fault of the GPC Wales and the Welsh Assembly government, because they were handed this. It was 2004 that they were handed, your Carr Hill is one. And he said that there's so many issues, and they were campaigning and lobbying the English government, saying this can't be fair. It can't be fair that the Carr Hill formula is one and England is one at the same time. It doesn't make any sense. But he was saying it's just like the Barnett formula. You're knocking on the door. You can demonstrate there's an injustice here. You can demonstrate this doesn't make any sense. If you were to look at this objectively, you would say we need more funding, and it fell on deaf ears. So that's what Ian Harris, Deputy Chair of GPC Wales, is saying.
Sorry, Matt. The thing is that the money is allocated via the Barnett formula. It is not allocated to Wales on the basis of the Carr Hill formula.
Well, the global sum allocation, the funding formula still is based in Westminster. So going through to the NHS shared services, where does that money come from? The money goes from Westminster to Northern Ireland back into Wales. So that's a central fault. So the Barnett formula might allocate the funding, but of that central funding that the Barnett formula gives, the global sum allocation is taken away directly at source, is from what I understand that. So they have the Barnett formula for health, and then they minus whatever the funding for the global sum allocation is through the Carr Hill formula is. But that's done centrally. So NHS shared services, when I was trying to do multiple freedom of information requests going, where is all this data? They go, it's in Westminster with Capita. So the allocation is done centrally in Westminster.
Well, I'm not convinced, but I'll leave it to others at the minute, Matt, okay? Because I'm sure others want to come in.
Okay, thanks. I'll speak to you later, Brian.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. We really appreciate you joining to give the context to, I think, to the question there. And obviously the complexity of this, it just keeps rising and rising. And we clearly need to keep making sure we've got access to the data to kind of fully understand. Please, colleagues, put your hand up if you've got questions. We've probably got about 10 minutes left in total. I can see Nick has got his hand up for now.
Thank you, Johnny. And thank you, Matthew. I've watched one of your YouTube videos explaining this in the past, but it's so much clearer when it's been explained in person. Although, as you acknowledge yourself, it's quite complicated to explain, and it's a difficult message to get across. So I'm going to ask about what engagement you have had in terms of trying to make the case to Welsh Government and to politicians to consider what changes could be made, bearing in mind that I'm on this call as Policy and Public Affairs Manager for the Royal College of GPs. There are people from the Deep End Group who are going to be developing a manifesto. I won't out them, but I think I spotted a health political researcher amongst the names as well. So you've got a bit of an audience now, but it'd be interesting to know how you see this message being taken forward, and how perhaps those organisations which will be covering much wider areas of health can perhaps pinpoint something that would support the case you're making. And finally, just to add to that as well, I'm sure you're aware, but the Health and Social Care Committee are actually currently calling for evidence on the future of general practice, and I think it would be very welcome if you could submit your findings to them, and I'm more than happy to nudge and elbow where I can to try and encourage them to call you as a witness. Thank you.
Yeah, that's on my to-do list. I did see that. It's by the end of March, isn't it? Something like that. I thought I had a. Do I have a
it's
little?
It's on all our to-do lists, I assure you.
So the question is, who have I done this to? So because this is a difficult one, because I went to the LMC, so I wrote directly to the health minister. I've written to the GPC Wales, and I've presented this to the LMC. I've spoken to our MS, Julie Morgan, and since then I've spoken to the senior medical officer in Wales. I've spoken to who else? The health board, the chief executive of the health board. I had an audience with Jeremy Miles as well, and I spoke to him. Similar presentation, saying that this needs to be looked at as a priority, because the funding differences are so large, and there are practices that are really struggling because not just deprived, but also a mixture of practices, and because they're not getting the core funding that they require to survive. So I think that was heard, and I don't know what's happening with the GPC Wales and the negotiations there. I presume they're ongoing, but everything, it's very, very quiet, isn't it? So I don't know if any of my messages have been received. I'll wait like everyone else.
Thanks, Nick. It's helpful to know where these pieces of intelligence can be put through to so that the right decisions are being made. So I'm just going through the chat whilst we have a few last minutes, if anybody's got any last questions to put across in video and audio. So Helen Wang, Matt has said, populations over the age of 65 in West Wales are around 25%. Compare that to Cardiff, where you've got around 15%. Everybody being paid by list size is not necessarily fair. James Martin, just to add in as well, has said, have you mapped practice closures to low Carr Hill practices? Okay. Is there any kind of link there?
Okay, so for Helen, what I would say is, this is, I'm not saying that we need to reorganize the whole of the Carr Hill. That would be impossible. And I'm not saying to take any funding away from anyone. All I'm saying is, from next year, if you look at and if you haven't received the Excel spreadsheet, then I'm more than happy to email you. If you look at the difference between the lowest funded practices in Cardiff or Aberystwyth or Newport, and compare them with some of the highest funded practices in Wales, the difference for a 10,000 patient practice would already be about 700, 800,000. So what I'm saying is that difference in funding already exists. And if you go, okay, there's £800,000 difference there, that's very likely to be able to buy you 6, maybe 7 full-time GPs. So what you're looking at is 48 sessions a week extra. And I think it's indefensible to give someone with £800,000 more money than that other practice. Does that make sense? So I'm not saying take it away from them. I'm just saying next year it can't turn out to be 825. The following year it can't be 850. That's unjustifiable and it's unsafe. And that's why I'm talking about having a human oversight to this, because you go, that would never happen. Say Helen, if you and Johnny were on the board, we would look at that and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. We don't need a huge amount of research to look at that. We'd just say, no, that's clearly enough. We need to, unless you've got overwhelming evidence to say that your demand is so high, you need more than 7 full-time GPs or 8 full-time GPs. You can't have any extra money than these guys, because these guys say they're on the brink of bankruptcy and annihilation. And it's fine, I believe them, because it makes sense from our funding point of view. In terms of James, you asking about, I don't think there is. There's a few. One of the reasons is because the MP has just disappeared. So it disappeared in 22, 23. There's also been historically, places that have shut have been really struggling to recruit. Now, everyone knows in the last 2 years there has been a radical change in employment statistics. The ST3s coming through are not able to be employed. There's 20, 25, 30 people going for every single job. So I think it will come into force, especially now MPIG's disappeared, now minimum wage has gone up, now you've got these mandated 6% pay rises. People aren't going to be, you can't make any extra income from anywhere else. It's almost impossible. So you go, this is what we're left with. Our core funding is our bread and butter. And if that is really significantly hampered, then yeah, I'm sure low Carr Hill practices will start shutting.
Okay, so just to nearly wrap up, Matt, Kerry Bailey from Private Care Division Public Health Wales, commend your work, so well done. Just for some context, there was supposed to be a secondary care formula to make sure that, you know, all aspects of the health system are needs-based, and clearly, I think, pointing out, as we discussed before, there are nation-to-nation inequalities in funding, then there are beneath-nation inequalities in terms of between how are we funding access to services, particular social groups. And I know that Kerry Bailey is very keen, understanding that we have access to data to see how are we meeting the needs of people in certain groups of the population that are at highest risk of social exclusion, be it people that are homeless, asylum seekers, and other groups of the population. I think we probably need to wrap up soon. I'm sure colleagues would be interested to know how they could see, as you put your email address there, the data that you've shared just now. What plans do you have in the midst of your busy job, Matt, to kind of publish this and make sure that it's available in the public domain, be it in terms of a briefing, a report, a research paper?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think we should do a research paper together, Johnny, at some point, or just we need to. Yeah, no, I need to get on with this. It's one of those things. I've been, the reason why it's been such an emergency is because there's a lot of funding that's just about to come into general practice, and it's going to be this 7.4% uplift potentially from last year. It's going to be backdated, and there's going to be another rescue package. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm trying to alert people to say, you can't. The GP Wales and the Welsh Assembly Government want to help general practice. What I'm saying, and what my argument is you don't have the framework to do it in. So that's why I'm shouting at everyone, writing to GP Wales all the time, writing to the Welsh Assembly Government. And this will be published. This list is going to go. I got it from a Freedom of Information Act, so it's going to get published at some point, either in a journal or someone's going to get hold of it, I suspect.
Lovely. So everybody listening and on the call, we're going to make sure that the slides, if Matt's happy for them to go up on our inverse care law group with Cardiff University, they'll be available there. Matt's kindly left his email address to be bombarded and spammed for access to this spreadsheet. This will be something that will be continuing to feed into national discussion, and if anybody's got any interests or questions you would like us to research further when it comes to inverse care law, we're very keen to know. As it's been mentioned, I think, in the call, Deep End Cymru, a network of GP practices in areas of greater deprivation, will be holding a series of discussions and surveys shortly to get ideas from Deep End members, both professionally and in the general public, for what could feed into a Deep End manifesto to be launched this summer into 2026. And any feedback for future events would be very welcome. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining again. Thank you for everybody joining the lunch break. We didn't get quite the 90 or so that had registered, really, but we still got a good 40, 50, and it's really fantastic to see that there's so much interest in making sure that we have not only a adequately funded primary care system, but we have a fairly funded primary care system too. That very much resonates with what we, clearly collectively believe and aspire to in Wales, and this clearly is the start of further conversations. So thank you very much, everybody. Look forward to being in touch soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers. Thanks, Ronnie.